I'd like to share with you some tips if you would like to role play prior to your upcoming job interview. I have over 7 years of experience coaching candidates primarily with FANGs, and at the end of the video I'm going to share with you a free professional grade method to role play for job interviews. First, on the topic of who you should be doing these mock interviews with. I found that the most common scenario is when candidates prefer to role play with either a family member or a friend or using AI. And this is extremely efficient if you would like to tune up your delivery. Right? So for example, if your answers are too long, you may get value from rehearsing them with a family member or with a friend. Things to consider here is that your interviewer is not someone who's knowledgeable, neither about your subject matter expertise or behavioral interviewing skills. So the maximum you may get from such an interaction would be cosmetic advice. Right? How does your tell me about yourself sound like? The second scenario is when you do a mock interview with a peer. In other words, someone who is with the same area of expertise such as yours. For example, many PMs would do a mock interview with another PM. On the reasoning, especially if you want to do a case interview or an interview on system design, so you have someone to challenge you with these sort of questions. The benefits of these mock interviews are evident, except if you prepare for a behavioral interview. For a behavioral interview, the main thing you should take into account is that if you're doing a mock interview with someone on the same area of expertise, they will not be efficient to tell you how intelligible you are. Okay? So in other words, if you're a software engineer and you do a role play on conflict resolution with another software engineer, they say, hey, it sounds great, I understand everything you're saying. However, their lens will be from a technical perspective, not a behavioral one, right? Even if they tell you, hey, I work there, trust me, that's only marketing, right? And the third scenario of choosing a role play buddy or partner would be what I call a professional interview coach, right? A career coach can be a great interview coach, but usually a career coach gives you general advice, while an interview coach, a behavioral interview coach, myself, is someone supposed to give you specific, actionable advice based, on the behaviors that you're supposed to be communicating with. Also, in my experience, especially for director and senior leadership roles, many times I was not their first interview coach, right? The second thing I like to talk about here is with respect to a very common question I get from my clients: how much coaching do I need? Right? If you want a direct type of answer, you will need as many coaching hours until it gets boring. Right? So as soon as you do a coaching session and you feel like you get no value from it, or you don't like your coach, then you should stop. Right? Now, in reality, what most candidates do would be to choose, a coaching package, such as 3 or 5 coaching sessions, and they would adjust. They would prepare more for one session to role play, more for other sessions to have more of a conversation and these sort of things. And the third scenario is what I call a one-off coaching session. Usually people do this to explore, hey, do I like you? Can you be my interview coach? Or they just do it prior to their job interview because they want to do a simple exercise with this regard, right? And the third thing I like to talk about here would be the side effects of interview coaching. Believe it or not, yes, there are side effects to this. One of them I like to talk about here would be scripted interview answers. So what happens is, yes, you can role play. You can do too many mock interviews to the extent that if you feel like you get bored and you feel like you get no value from rehearsing your interview answers, and it actually can be quite the opposite. Your interview answers will sound scripted after a certain point. So what you should be particularly attentive to is to only role play if you feel like you're getting value from it. Right? The second downside of interview coaching, it can be quite taxing on your mental. Right? So we all go, to some rough times. In life, mental health is sometimes better than other times. So what I found is that, again, in over 7 years I do this, there is a certain element of paying attention to how your client reacts to stress. Because what happens is any interview coach will try to put pressure on you because they would want to replicate what happens in these job interviews, or they would have to do, some tricks in order to read you better, not just to see how you react on the pressure, but also other stuff. And what happens is that if you're going to some slightly uncomfortable times, you don't have mental strength, some people might get discouraged, right, out of coaching sessions. So you must also be aware that you must find a balance between a coach that is, puts pressure on you, right, someone qualified for this, but also ideally a coach that gives you strength in the end, right? So this is something you should also keep in mind, that the outcome of these coaching sessions would be to give you strength and to interview better. And last, I promised you I'd share with you a free method to do professional grade interviews. And I know that at least many of the people I work with are looking for their dream jobs, right? And they would prepare, to interview with, 2, 3 of these companies that will have their dream jobs. If you are interested to do a free role play with the professional interviewers, you might as well consider interviewing with a backup company, a company that's not as interesting as some FAANGs or maybe, the OpenAIs or Anthropics. And the reason for this would be that you would get a hands-on reaction of how you perform during these job interviews. And I encourage you to go through all interview stages up until the job offer. Because, of course, it's a free way to interview, but you already have the CV, so your investment will be minimal. And the outcome can be quite interesting for many candidates. And if you choose to go this way, you could also consider recording especially your final interview, so you can also have the opportunity to get some feedback, if needed, of your performance. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.